This is AgGrad Live.
We have all of the different segments within the cotton.
The show that explores what it's really like to work in the ag industry.
So making sure that we get policy and regulatory issues
straight from the people who live it every day.
Hey, AgGrad Nation. This is Tim Hammerich. I am coming at you live for another episode of AgGrad Live. Very excited about our guest today. I actually had the pleasure of being on her podcast not very long ago, but I need to make sure I mention before I forget that you have 14, but two weeks exactly. You have 2 weeks exactly to nominate someone for 30 under 30. So in order to do that, it's a really easy URL. I'm typing it right now. Just go to 30under30.ag, and anyone you know that's in their 20s doing impressive work in ag, in areas of production, agribusiness, entrepreneurship, advocacy, research and technology, any of the above, make sure you nominate them there at 30under30.ag. But back to our guest today. We have on the show Kirby Green. Kirby is a district sales manager for Bayer Crop Sciences, and she has the very popular podcast for young professionals, which I hope you all are already listening to, called Sharpen. So Kirby, welcome to AgGrad Live.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me. I was actually jotting down a note about the 30 under 30. I can think of a lot of excellent candidates in agriculture. So I'm already distracted because I'm like, oh, and this person, but it's so good to be here today. And I really love the work that you do. We so enjoyed having you on Sharpen for that conversation.
Thank you. And thanks for the free plug. That was not planned for everybody watching. But yeah, no, it only takes a minute for those of you who want to go nominate, and then I'll leave this alone. 30 under 30 only takes a minute, can make a big difference. But excited about that program. But let's talk about you. Tell us, let's start maybe with your day job. What do you do day to day, and kind of what brought you to that point?
Yeah, sure. So as Tim mentioned, I'm a district sales manager for Bayer Crop Science. That is more recent. So prior district sales manager for Monsanto. I'm on the seed business, and I've been doing that role for, I just realized it's been 6 years now. And time flies when you're having fun. And I really do mean that. The work that I've been a part of has been very challenging and interesting. And I just love the work and the customers that I get to work with. It's kind of interesting though, as I'm sitting here, because my high school reunion was, that was last summer, I believe, our 10-year reunion. And I remember all of us gathering around and everyone asking, so what are you doing now, right? And we were learning where everybody was in life. And I'd shared with everyone that I was in a sales role in agriculture, and they're like, wait, what happened? You mentioned you were going to be an ag teacher. So my background, I was a high school ag teacher in Paducah, Kentucky, and absolutely loved my time in the classroom. If any of my students are listening, former students, or get the chance to check this out, they will know just how we just had such a great time together. And being an ag teacher was so formative in my early career. And so I always mention that because those experiences in the classroom, whether it's relationship building with multiple stakeholders, whether it's grant writing, preparing a lesson, you name it. I think that my time in the classroom, I'm so thankful for not only the students I got to invest in, but the skills that we're really honed in on. I think the transition came at also a kind of crazy time frame. I wasn't actually looking for the role. Someone, I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this, Tim, but someone that comes into your life and says, hey, I'm doing this thing, and I think you would be a great addition to this team, and here's the things that I've seen. And so I thought, well, what will it hurt? I'm really happy with what I'm doing. And long story short, I spent 3 years in Northeast Indiana, and then I'm 3 years in Kentucky in this role.
Okay, well, one thing I want to make sure we do is dig in a little bit deeper beyond just like the opportunity falling into your lap. What do you think it was about you that caused that to happen? Because I get a lot of calls from people saying I am, and it's not necessarily with ag teacher, but with whatever. I'm doing X and I'd like to do Y, but I feel like I'm already committed to X. Like, how do I get there? So what do you think it was that you did that helped you make that pivot from ag teacher to district sales manager?
Yeah, I still joke with my teammates to this day that if you look at the application, I didn't meet I don't know how many qualifications. I certainly didn't meet a lot of them. Can't say that I still do. No, I hope I do now. But I would say that's one place to start is and maybe that's terrible advice. You're far more in this space than I am, Tim. But I remember reading the qualifications and thinking, because if you look at any application, there'll be the qualifications, like the absolute requirements that there's no budging on, but then there's also like the added things. The added things are perks. And for me, I looked at them and thought, I can learn how to do that. I don't know a lot about that. I think I can learn how to do that. So that would probably be the first thing is don't psych yourself out on reading in the application or the qualifications in their entirety. I think that there are some things that employers can't budge on, and there are others that's like, well, you can learn that, and that would be great if you came into the role. But as far as you asking to kind of go back on that transition, I think that certainly preparing for the interview, but understanding that I probably wasn't going to be the traditional candidate coming into that role. And how can I leverage that to my to my end? And so I tried to highlight experiences in the classroom that I knew could be potential business settings in a sales role that would tie those two together, that would essentially create a bridge from point A to point B to really see and paint that picture of, oh, okay, you know what? Maybe she was doing it in a different setting, but she was still doing this thing we're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say maybe that's a bit of encouragement, and that's also something practically of when you're in that interview, if certainly getting to that point. But another thing is just one of my favorite books is called Never Eat Alone. I highly recommend it for all of your audience. And I think that it's a great book on building relationships and networking, as many of us call it, and maybe you like it or don't like it. But ultimately, it's relationship building. And my friend Whitney always will say, relationships aren't something that you take off a shelf whenever you need them. Like a picture frame or something, you just dust them off just in time to ask for something. Like relationships are something that you constantly maintain and invest in and add value to. And I can't say that I've done that perfectly, but many of the people who were actually at the company that I was interested in said, hey, we know her, here's our experiences, and she's actually invested us in this way, and I would give her my recommendation.
Cool. Well, so a couple things. Number one is we have Never Eat Alone right here on my desk.
This was not planned, everyone.
I'm willing to give this to the first person who comments that they want it in the comments. I don't know if that's somebody live. We've got a few people on live, but if you're watching this and you don't see a comment below, you're watching it later, then comment and I'll send DM me your address and I'll send it to you, because we need more live viewers and we need to create some incentives to do that. But a couple things that stand out about this, and you could just feel free to tell me I'm dead wrong if I am. But two things that you said that kind of stood out to me. Number one is the fact that they knew you, so they were part of your network. So you'd already done some networking there. You weren't just like on job boards applying for every job, which is something that I get a lot of people saying. I've applied for every job I could find on a job board and no one's getting back to me. And not to say you should never do that. That can be part of your approach. But I think more importantly is to build an authentic network, because that's really what's going to get you from point A to point B. Secondly is you relocated, didn't you? You had to leave and relocate to take this job, and you're willing to do so. And that's surprisingly uncommon. Let me tell you, at this point in my life, I could not relocate. So I don't want to sound hypocritical here, but if you're looking for a way to get ahead, that could be one. And consistent among everybody who pushes back on me and says, you say there's a lot of opportunities in ag, but I'm not seeing them, almost to the T, every single one of them also won't relocate, which really limits opportunity.
Yeah, I totally skimmed over that in hindsight, and I should have stopped there for a bit, because Tim, for me, it was I had thought, I'm not going to move. The reason I was interested in this role is because is geographically where I was located at the time, and really loved the community I was part of. And I remember my husband and I were going to talk about it, and it was like, why not? Let's start out there. And the only really thing that we could come up with was really, and outside of like missing your family and friends and your community and those people, but it was like, we'll miss them, but we're in the stage of life, like we need to go and do it. And if comfort zone is the why not, then that's probably more of a reason to do it. And I share that same message with other young professionals that I'll talk to about relocating. It was the best thing that we it was a we decision could have ever done. I think professionally, I met the folks in that ag network. You know, every state almost has their group of ag people, and get to know people I would have never have had the chance to get to know because I worked with them. And personally, I think that I'll often share that I think when you're a young person that moves to a new city where you know no one, you learn how to initiate and build relationships and foster community because you're the new kid on the block and no one knows anything about you. And that's okay. Like, especially if you're like me and you grew up in a hometown and everyone knows everything, that can be a really, really healthy place to be, and just really pour into and invest into people and build those authentic relationships that you're talking about.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, let's talk about Sharpen. Tell us, what is Sharpen all about?
Yeah, well, Sharpen is a podcast for young professionals. And if you search on Apple Podcast or Stitcher or wherever you listen to your podcasts, you will find Sharpen, the podcast for young professionals. And you will also find the Future of Agriculture podcast there as well. So make sure you check out both of those. But I'll back up a little bit to the story. So I'm a mom of two small girls, 2 and 4 years old. And I can remember I had just had my second little one, and life was changing, right? My flexibility wasn't exactly the same as it had been. But of course, I was on maternity leave. I just had my youngest daughter. And when I say flexibility in the sense of, I was learning to filter down to say no more often than when I needed to, and then when I definitely needed to say yes. Flexibility doesn't mean that you cut off all networking. But I remember being at this point in my career and thinking, like, I want to be super intentional about building strong relationships, and maybe it's going to look a little bit different. And I remember there was an article on LinkedIn. I'm sure it was like 3 a.m. And what else do you do? And there was an article that said the #1 mistake women make in their 30s. And it wasn't specifically to women in agriculture careers. And honestly, as I read it, it wasn't specific to women at all. It said that when folks enter into their 30s, they stop networking. And it's because they tend to be like really driving in their career. So they feel like, hey, I've got this. I don't know if you were like me, Tim. When I started in that role as a DSM in Northeast Indiana, I talked to numerous people all day long because you don't know what you're doing sometimes. And so you spend a lot of time reaching out and job shadowing and ride-alongs. And I was to that point, I was like, I see exactly what they're talking about. I'm starting to know what this role is and to anticipate things in advance. So I remember a few months later, I was driving down the road and I listened to a lot of podcasts while I drive to really maximize that time, including your podcast as well. And I remember being like, well, these are great podcasts. I love keeping up to date with agricultural hot topics like yours. I love podcasts in leadership and development. I wonder if there is a podcast for folks that are in that first 10 years of their career, because I think that that's such a huge decade of your career, and there's a lot of wisdom to be shared, and I couldn't really find anything. And so as I started to think about it, I'm like, well, if I love podcasts, I know that a lot of my friends were always sharing an episode or one in particular. There are probably others that are like me. And if at the very least, all that happens is I record an episode and 5 people listen to it and we all grow and develop in their careers, like that's a pretty good worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And I also talked my best girlfriend and my husband into listening. So I knew I had 2 subscribers. So I was covered. But what I found over time was that not only did Tyler and Annie want to listen to the podcast, but so did many young professionals.
Mhm.
And because the podcast is for those in the first 10 years of their career, you know that content is geared toward that season of life. And I've been so thankful so that was in April of 2017. And the podcast has grown over time, and the topics have changed, and it's very much focused on the holistic side of someone as a young professional. The tagline is sharpening young professionals for the workplace and beyond. But I find myself just so encouraged when I get that email in the inbox from a listener that reached out to a mentor, that traveled to a new city for a conference that they never would have gone to. And so what the hope is too is as the podcast grows and develops over time, is that this audience of young professionals will not only listen to it and be sharpened for their day, but then turn that around and sharpen others, turn that back in and invest in others. So hopefully that answered a little bit about the podcast. And if anybody's listening and has additional questions, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, I've got some additional questions. And you're the perfect guest for today, because actually our 1-year-old is home very sick. And so if you hear crying in the background, that's on my end. It's probably, you will understand if anybody will.
Yeah, so, I probably won't even hear it. Like it'll
about 2 a.m, I don't hear it either. I just figure it out. With Sharpen, and you work for a very large corporate agribusiness, were you at all concerned about having a voice independent of the company you were supposed to be representing, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because some of the individuals listening may find themselves in a similar industry, maybe ag or not. For me, I thought the podcast is not necessarily directly related to the company that I'm working for. Yes, I'm a young professional. To me, if anything that I've learned through my time with Monsanto, now Bayer Crop Science, is that our company is deeply committed to developing you as a person. And so we create professional development goals both in and out of the business every year. And so the work that I do is not a part of the business work that I'm a part of, but I've always shared the work that I'm doing in Sharpen and lessons I'm learning and how I've changed things in my role because of these conversations I've had. And so one of my favorite episodes was about an integrated life, and it was with a man by the name of Greg Enos, and he had talked about how yes, we do need to compartmentalize in some ways, but in others, like, I just can't ignore the fact that this interview today on the Sharpen podcast, which isn't my quote day job, impacted the rest of my day in agribusiness because it taught me this. And so while I don't use my day job time frame to really be the main manager of the podcast, I've learned how to manage that in terms of time. But I think also whenever you live an integrated life, you may be traveling, because I get a lot of questions around, well, practically what does that look like, right? Because so far all you've told us, Kirby, is kind of the theoretics of what you believe and why around this lifestyle or whatever. But I think practically what that can look like is if you're traveling for work, you can really maximize your time in a hotel room. I mean, you're a parent of small kids. You can really maximize your time in a hotel room because when you get home, like, you want to be fully present for that role. Right. And so I've learned how to figure out things like that. Practically speaking, I've learned with this quote, side gig separate from my day job, how to maximize mornings to be able to do some work for that. And so I'm still learning what that looks like. But at the end of the day, the conversations that take place, I'm so thankful for, because they completely impact the rest of the days and weeks and the work that I do in my corporate role.
Cool. No, that makes sense. I think what I find so impressive is you've got an important job, a demanding job. You've got, family responsibilities as well. And, this is really a passion project on your end. I mean, it's something that you're just passionate about. And I don't know if it makes like an additional stream of income or if that's even an intention of the project. But what is it about it that's just like, when you have those late nights and you're like, oh, I got to put out a podcast next week, that you say, okay, it's worth doing this? Because I think people watching or listening are thinking, I would love to do something like that. I don't know where I would find the time. And the truth is, as you know, you'll find the time if you're that motivated. And so I guess my question to you is, what makes you that motivated that you find the time?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I apologize because I think my dog is barking in the background. So will this be the first Ag Grad Live that someone's dog was barking in the background?
I can't imagine it is. It's probably usually mine. I've got 2 dogs. So
yeah. If a kid's not crying, a dog's barking, there's just always somebody barking.
Isn't there always a dog barking in the state of Kentucky?
I think so, or a cow mooing, or bourbon being made. One of the things is going on. I'm really thankful you asked that question. I think that the thing that, or there's a couple of things that, keep me invested in this passion project. I think on a personal level, I've seen, because I think as the host of the Sharpen podcast, the podcast for young professionals, I am right there in the midst of all of that. So the questions come certainly from the audience, but they're my questions too, right? And so I personally have seen the difference that these conversations have just made in my own days in life, and that keeps me inspired. I think it also keeps me accountable to the work because I know that it makes a difference. I would say that, so one thing is, if you're a listener of any podcast, and Tim, I'm sure you feel this way, if you take the time to reach out to a podcast host or any kind of creative medium and share with them of how an episode or a blog post or whatever it is really inspired you or helped you, that is a huge motivator in the work that you do, because you know that it's making a difference. And so those emails of listeners who have reached out to say, hey, I had a conversation today with my boss about this, and I just wanted to tell you that episode helped me walk through this. That makes it worth it. One of my friends, who's a past guest and just certainly a friend too, would say, let's be about growing good fruit on others' trees. And so when that happens, there's just something that I'm sure that it's just the encouragement, I'm sure there's like a chemical endorphin that goes on when you get that type of message, but it's a little bit of an addiction to know that you're helping young professionals. And you, I'm trying to remember the other part of your question. You had asked about keeping motivated. The time. So I would say everyone is short on time, right? The thing is everyone gets the same amount of time per day. And so I began to take a look at, because in the beginning of the podcast, I did all of the scheduling and producing and editing. And then I realized that, and doing that taught me like the trade-off. So sometimes you can use your time to scroll through Instagram, or I could go use it to edit a podcast. And sometimes I really didn't want to edit a podcast, but I knew I had this schedule of episodes. And so I would say, really analyze your day. Some people that go through like a time management check-in will make an Excel sheet, and every 15 minutes of their day, they'll log exactly what they do. And it holds you accountable to cut out the fluff of things that are time wasters. And so I just learned where I could cut things out that really didn't make any difference at all. But I say all that, I'm still learning about that as well, of how to manage my time better. But mostly, and you heard me talk about, I just think there's something about mornings, even if you're not a morning person, if you have any interest in a passion project, like a podcast or a blog, by cultivating your morning to be this time, you can to not only be reflective, but you can get a lot of work done, because before the rest of the world is awake and calling and emailing and texting, you can really, even if it's 30 minutes, so even that might be a challenge, like get up 30 minutes earlier, you can really crank out some work on a passion project.
Okay, right along those lines, we've got a couple of great questions from those tuning in. So while we're on the subject, I want to get all of these. Elise is asking about productivity tips while on the road. So she says, agreed, even though I'm not a parent of small children, I love a free evening in a hotel room. Any productivity tips for the road?
Oh, and Tim, I want to hear yours as well.
Oh, I am horrible at this. So you go first. I'll give you all the examples of what not to do.
There's definitely a pressure, right? Whenever you're traveling, I think when I say there's a pressure to, that could be really great time to spend, whether you're part of a team or if you know someone that lives in that city and you might not see them but once a year. I mean, definitely take advantage of those opportunities, of course. I always try to think of, and I try not to be over the top about having multiple notebooks, but if there's like a notebook that I scratch notes in for Sharpen, like pack that and know that that's going to be like the hotel project. But even if it's 1 to 2 or 3 things that I can get done that evening, just to make some progress. For me, I'm just trying to be practical with the podcast. I'll also ask each month, like, what's one thing that's really simple that I can do on the podcast this month that would make it better? And then try to use some of that spare time to do it. But I would love to hear any ideas as well as how folks really crank through that time.
I think, the one mistake that I have made so many times, I try not to continue to make is I try to cram too much into too little time when I'm on the road. It's like, oh boy, I don't start till 10 in the morning at this conference. So I wonder if I can get a super early flight out and get there, just in time, instead of like, no, just take the flight the day before and give yourself some time. Because what happens to me inevitably is I try to cram too much in too little of a time. I don't do a good job while I'm traveling, and then I come back and I need like a week to recover from, a few days gone. And it would have been a lot better if I would have just, booked an earlier flight or delayed a flight coming back or something, to try to give myself the ability to function a lot better. But that's a mistake I make a lot. I don't know if we offered enough tips there, but I think it's a really good question. It's a constant struggle.
Yeah, and at least because I know you are probably a great master of this too. So I'm like, oh, I need her to send me all of her tips. But the other thing too, I think on the road is just to make sure, you had mentioned like flying out like at the crack of dawn. And so for me, I know like I'll think that that's a better approach, and then I'll eat terribly and be exhausted, and so even that can be a productivity in itself to like, I'm going to sleep a full night's rest. I'm going to eat well. I'm going to get some exercise in, and that'll kind of change even how I'm able to manage my time. I'm a little bit more motivated. So. Right.
Definitely. All right. We have another question here from Brett, and let me get this up on the screen. Brett asks, should young professionals consider or continue to pursue higher education beyond undergrad or technical degree if they are already employed? Is there any incentive for this? And this is what we talked about when I was on your podcast. So we have a background in discussing this. But my overall, I would say my high level, and of course this is not true in 100% of circumstances, but is that beyond an undergraduate degree, you should pursue an advanced degree if you know what area you want to be working in and you want to go deeper. I think the mistake people make here is that they use advanced education as a career discovery tool. And I will tell you from firsthand experiences, the programs are not designed to be that. They're not designed to help you find your way in life. They're designed to help you go deeper in one specific way. So that's my overarching philosophy on it. But welcome any thoughts you have too, Kirby.
No, this is so perfect, because that was the episode that you joined us on Sharpen, and I've shared that message in that episode several times of folks that have that same question. The thing that I think even came up in that conversation was sometimes once you really, and this probably sounds like really cliche, but say like, what is your goal? And if the goal is to really like hone in on an area of expertise, like that sounds like a really great fit. If the goal is, well, I thought it would be, or I'm looking for a strategic opportunity to network with folks in like insert the space. Then there may be a really great conference that can meet your goals for that area of development. Because I even think like there's a financial component of just being strategic about how you're investing, your dollars. That's one thing as a young professional. We all know that most of us are not sitting on just a ton of cash to throw around at any undergraduate or excuse me, master's program under the sun. And so there might be something that can really meet your goals if you just kind of maybe pull back the layers. Because I know, and I say that from personal experience of like, okay, what is my goal? Is my goal this? Then if not, then maybe there's a great conference.
Yeah. If I ever, if I ever get to the point where I have some extra time, I would love to do a project called like create my own masters, where, for let's say for like 2019, you're going to make your own masters and you're going to do a combination of books, networking events, online courses, Facebook groups, and you're just going to really attack what you want to learn, because you could do it really cheap and really easily if you just kind of focused on some of the resources that are already available to you. But there are some fields where you need a degree. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I interrupt. I'm so glad you mentioned reading and books. I just feel so passionate about this, and all of my friends in Owensboro, Kentucky are probably like, of course, Kirby's talking about this in one more instance. I discovered that in the state of Kentucky, you can use your library card and connect it to an app called Libby and an app called Hoopla, and you can listen to free audiobooks and digital books, and the resources are amazing.
Right.
And just by going back to like using our time well, I've really cut out some time that I just mismanaged as I spent some time analyzing that. And then you've got these resources at your fingertips. And so if I have something from a business perspective, just maybe general business acumen, I want to know the lingo better. So when we're talking about the quarterly report, I know what the heck that word meant. There's probably a free book or an audiobook that in 3 hours, I invest my time in 1 week. And now I'm not an expert. That's okay, but I can at least have a conversation. And so sometimes there's one of my favorite sales bloggers, Anthony Irinero.
Irinero.
There we go. I was like, I'm saying his last name wrong. He's going to be so offended. But he talks about the 10,000 hour rule of somebody being an expert. Most people who have written a book are an expert. Or they've lived this thing, right, that gives them this perspective. And then they write a book on it. And then you could potentially go to your library, or heck, for $10, get it off Amazon. And it's a tool to help us save time in becoming knowledgeable. And so I'll get off my soapbox now, Tim, about this, but I just think that as a young professional, reading and even like so audiobooks is just a great resource. Build that into the way we use our time.
Right. And of course, the Sharpen podcast.
That's right. Listen.
I have to throw this up here because if Elise said it, it must be true. The Kentucky state flag says a dog is always barking in Kentucky. All right. Well, if you weren't here a few minutes ago, you might have to go back and list that part to get that little inside joke that was just created here. All right. Well, I know our time is running a little bit short here, and you are very busy, but would love to just hear any sort of your top, and maybe we just disclosed it with the reading thing, but your top advice for young professionals and anyone who's tuning into this show, either in video form or on the podcast.
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I'm very passionate about reading. I think it's probably better said as being a lifelong learner. I would try to question myself of if I think I've mastered something, I probably haven't. But if I'm getting to that point that I'm becoming like more in tune, and I don't want to call an expert in any realm, but it's probably time to explore something different. And so that's why the podcast timing is, oh gosh, Tim, I had no background in a podcast and RSS feeds and analytics and the technology. And so that was exciting to have a challenge. So if I'm going to say I'm a lifelong learner, then I want to do the things that make me become a lifelong learner. And so I think theoretically build that into who you are, and then practically map that out. So I think be a lifelong learner is one. Another thing for me as a young professional is building personal disciplines. And what I mean by that is I can't even remember now who maybe explained this to me. But just building things in of what our days and weeks and months and quarters and years look like personally. And so just to give you some practical examples of that, that means that every day I do these things, and every week I do these things, and every month I do these things. And it could be like every month I read 2 books, and every week I exercise 3 times, and every week I write a thank you note to someone in my company. But building these personal disciplines for me has been a game changer, because it's not about that you necessarily follow them perfectly. It's that you have benchmarks to hold yourself accountable to the things that you want to be about. Because going back to that kind of scenario you painted in the very beginning of being in a job search. And so when many of us graduate college, we all want to land into a job we love, and then we want to constantly, be such a marketable, young professional, and everybody wants us to work for them. And I think that the way we get there, from seeing this modeled by others, is they're very keen on their disciplines. Mm-hmm. And so they build skill sets over the long haul in their professionals and personal lives that make them very well-rounded, very valuable. So that would be the second thing. Trying to think if there's anything that I would say. Oh, well, going back to never eat alone, I just think relationship building and I always remembered growing up and hearing people talk about, like, and it's just a friendly saying of, don't burn a bridge. You never know when you're going to need something. And I always try to encourage, if I'm ever at a high school ag program or whatever the environment is, to say, I think that's bad advice, because I don't think it's you be kind to everyone or don't burn the bridge, because you never know when you're going to need something, or to say, like, I could call this person up right now. I think that then points the direction of that it's about asking from things from other people. And I think as a young professional, you want to be someone that is investing, and that can be really tricky, because you're like, wait, there's this, senior executive in my company who like has it all kind of figured out, and they're doing pretty well. And how in the heck am I supposed to invest in them or be of value to them? And I would say that there's something in every person's life that you could, maybe it's something that they said, maybe it's the way their eyes lit up when they were talking about their son or daughter starting to school at this university, and you happen to have a friend still there. And said, well, let me connect them. They'll be a great tour guide. I just think that there are ways to add value in relationships and to do that over the long haul. Because that is the type of person that, I don't know about you, Tim, but that's the kind of person, it's like, that's the kind of person I want to hire. That's the kind of person I want to be with. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone who's constantly thinking about how they can bring more value instead of thinking about how others can give them more value. I think that's fantastic. I love all that, especially the discipline stuff. I need more discipline in my life, so that was really good advice. I never did give away this book. Nobody commented that they want it, so it's still open. Otherwise, I guess I will have to reread it. Kirby Green, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for those of you tuned in live. Brett, Elise, thanks for comments and questions. That was a lot of fun, Kirby. Thanks for being here.
This was a lot of fun, and I'm so glad that I need t-shirts made that say there's always a dog barking in Kentucky.
Thank you for joining AgGrad Live. Visit aggrad.com, that's AGGRAD, to join the community, create your profile, and learn more about careers in the agriculture industry.